Headlander knows what it is, but it doesn't know what it wants to be. The tutorial gives you a singular impression. This game is a puzzler with light action elements with a lot of sci-fi decapitation. Although that core loop never truly wavers, the game keeps trying to ditch the promise it made in the first handful of minutes. As a result, its diversions feel less like variety and more like an identity crisis played out across 6 hours. When it has the space to breathe, it's a fine if slight action-adventure game, but such moments become rarer and rarer as it goes on. Eventually, that breathing slipped into hyperventilation, and Headlander lost me completely. In Headlander, you play a disembodied head. You don't know who you are, you can't speak, and you've got a sick rocket where your neck used to be. You've been woken from your slumber by Earl, a disembodied trucker voice who fills you in on what you've missed.
I ain't much sure why, but Methuselah wants a hold of you. We gotta get y'all off this ship. Don't worry, I'll talk you through. Name's Earl, by the way.
It's the future. All human brains have been uploaded to robot bodies and an evil AI is in charge. You might just be the last organic being in the solar system, so Earl recruits you to fight this evil AI and his army. Your primary method of fighting back is to use the vacuum function on your space helmet to pop heads, dongles, enemy crystals, and other dome-shaped knickknacks off their perch, and take control. That helmet you're wearing isn't up to much in a straight fight, but take over that robot and you've got a fighting chance. Over the course of the tutorial, you should get the hang of the game pretty quickly. Within minutes, I found myself ripping cybernetic heads off artificial bodies, booking it towards their buddy, launching off at the last second, and ripping off my foe's head while they were still confused. It's great fun, although it kinda got old once I'd mastered the system. Once you're off the tutorial ship and on the space station where the majority of the game takes place, Headlander's progression goes sideways. There's a simple Metroidvania, get the powers, said power unlocks new areas and old passageways type structure, with stronger and stronger enemies as you progress. All that works just fine, but when Headlander tries to get clever, I get lost. There's an odd diversion midway through where you engage in a blood sport that reads as a cross between the Hunger Games and the chess game from Harry Potter, but it's 2.5D. You have to take a specific chess-themed body from one side of the arena to the other, do this multiple times, and then you get to bang your head against a long, frustrating boss fight. None of this is entertaining in any way. Headlander mixes things up a handful of other times. There's an arena fight where a bunch of repurposed map robots show up and stun lock you to death, and it's so goddamn terrible that I briefly considered converting to nihilism in response, but it never manages to be as successful as other games that play with their own mechanics. In, say, the latter Saints Row, those kinds of diversions pull from a set of core, previously established mechanics. Here, it just feels like Headlander changed the channel and you're playing a segment from a slightly different game. Don't get me wrong, a guided tour through a science fiction anthology would have worked if these ideas were given their due. As it stands, the diversions feel muted, like they aren't being pushed to their full potential in what little time they have. The same can be said for Headlander's primary themes. Like, dude, what if machines were alive? It's cool to see this idea framed through 1970s retro future instead of slick next Sunday AD seen in games like Deus Ex or movies like Ex Machina. But that's not enough. I finished Headlander about an hour ago and I couldn't tell you what its overall stance on transhumanism was. Not to spoil the story, but there's no real moral choice, interactive or otherwise, presented to any of the characters. The idea of freedom fighters trying to return to their organic roots, pushing against a system where most of the citizens seem content with their new lives, could be an interesting jumping off point, but the antagonist is never presented as anything beyond just an evil robot. He's just HAL 9000 without the unsettling charisma. We've seen the android moral dilemma before, but Headlander does little to stand out among its peers, or even to enter the same conversation. It lacks the bombast of the Deus Ex prequels, the emotional and thematic interplay of The Fall, or the intimacy of the Hateful Days duology. Here, characters talk at you about the nature of humanity for like a minute, and then nobody says anything for another couple hours. The story has the same problem. Emotional beats come and go with little to no impact. Named character deaths should not feel this inert. At the very least, the player should have an idea of how that event changes the narrative thrust, but nobody seems to care. Engaging with this game's writing is a fool's errand, but hey, at least some of the jokes are funny. Headlander's aesthetic, one of its biggest selling points, feels very surface level. I do appreciate the 70s sci-fi look, you don't see much of that in media these days, but it doesn't really exist to create a mood, further a theme, or really affect the game in any way. Aside from a shag carpet, Headlander's world doesn't feel any more analog. It does look good though, for all that's worth. The more I played Headlander, the more I was itching for any kind of depth. When it's not shallow, it's frustrating. I did honestly enjoy the segments where the game sheds its ambitions in favor of light, affable Metroidvania puzzling, but there aren't enough of those moments. The parts of Headlander that don't quite fit, They chafe to the point of discomfort. Without those lackluster diversions, it would be an amicable trifle. Even at its best, this game feels like an idea, gestating in real time, like a sponge dinosaur filling up with water. So much of Headlander teases you with the idea of what could have been, and it's kind of a shame because the game we actually got is kind of a bummer. This review of Headlander was written by Cosimano. Go check it out on Destructoid.com.